Good. That's my best finish. Sorry. I'm John Lammerts from Bueren, and thank you for coming here. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure to be in Finland. My talk this afternoon was supposed to be about Olin Stephens, but I'm going off script. You'll see why, and I hope you don't mind me doing so. I won't talk as much about the boats and the designs of Olin Stephens, but more about the man himself. For whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, I don't know what I did to be lucky enough to travel with Olin outside sailing, and that was quite extraordinary. So we'll touch on that, and anyway, here we start. So the opening picture here is Wim. You're not allowed to have favorites in this place, of course. Certainly not because she's not Finnish, but Wim is not just my favorite 12, it's probably my favorite boat. And just a really short one. I was in Italy one day, I had a meeting at Yacht Club Italiano, and they booked this beautiful Victoria hotel in Genoa for me. And Carlo Croce, the Commodore, comes in and says, I heard they booked a hotel for you, I cancelled it. I said, okay, right. So where am I staying? He says, Wim is in port, and I called the owner and I had the boat prepared for you. And so basically I come below, and there was Wim, and he put Italian style, silk sheets, flowers, the whole shebang, as if it was this fantastic luxurious hotel, but then just a bunk in Wim. One of the best nights on board ever. So, good. So when it comes to Olin Stephens, there's much to tell. Where do you start and where does it end? As the stories of the past are told, his legacy lives on. His boats today still win races, still bring joy to so many people, and his boats continue to expand his legacy more incredible. So in thinking about, but I think I was here to talk about Olin, and I was looking for a bridge, and I was looking for an excuse to talk about this thing. Sorry for that. But that was. But the bridge I found was, I cheated, I thought Plym was a really good one, and Plym built Ester, and Olin loved Plym, so, well, we're back to why I was here, sorry for that. Okay, here we are. This is, we're back at Plym, and a good number of Olin's designs were built by Plym. Plym was not a particularly big yard, but an incredibly good yard, and Olin deeply respected the perfection and the workmanship there. And so did Rod. Rod went there quite often. But however much Olin respected Plym's work, they did not always agree. Can you come forward? Okay, one further. Okay, there you go. Here's a little story that goes back to 1998 in Rochester. We had organized. I used to run the 8 Meter Association in some moment of foolishness which lasted 23 years. We organized a match race event at Rochester Yacht Club. We invited Dennis Conner and Ted Turner to come and sail with us, and Dennis sort of said $30,000 in expenses and I'll be there, and Ted just said, can I bring Jane? So, sure. So Ted came over together with Jane Fonda and with his son Teddy, and we lined up 6-8 meters, and we had the 7th one, which was the ghost boat, and that was the one that Ted would drive. And we just raced for 3 days, and he jumped from one boat to another, absolutely fantastic. But it was also the opportunity, and Olin, Graham Hayward was the chief umpire, who was also the chief umpire of the America's Cup at the time, and Olin Stephens came over as the honorary chairman of the event. It was absolutely fantastic. And there was Iskareen. And Olin designed Iskareen back in 1939, but he never saw the boat. She was built at Plym, just to send the drawings over and said it's at Plym, it's fine. So, at the point in the corner he sort of said, hey, there's my Iskareen, should we go and have a look? So Olin and we walked over, and he's invited on board, of course, and he comes on board, and the first thing he does, he dives below deck, and he has a look underneath the deck. I don't know if I have a pointer. Anyway, Olin goes below deck, and the first thing he does is look underneath the deck. Does the pointer work or no? Do I ask him, what are you looking for? he says, well, you know, John, when I designed this boat back in 1939, Mr. Plim, he wrote me a letter that he did not agree with the way that I designed her. And Olin designed her the typical way that the Americans designed the boats, and that's with the deck beams sitting on top of the shelf. And if you look at the deck beams, you have the beam shelf on the side, and this is the American way where you see the deck beam sit on top of the shelf. And so his story was, you know, Mr. Plim, he wrote me a letter, he did not agree, and he wanted to put the deck beams inside the shelf. And he gave his reasons, and I, you know, wrote him a letter back, and why I thought it wasn't a good idea and that it would not be good for ventilation or whatever. And he said, yeah, but you know, Mr. Plim never replied to me in 1939. I'm just checking what he did. And sure enough, it was clear that Plim did what he wanted to do, because that was his thing, is to connect the outer skin with the deck beam and the beam shelf and the covering board and make it into one box construction, which made it much stiffer. So, but it was incredible where every normal human being would sort of say, hey, there's my design of 1939, and Olin just wanted to solve a mystery. It was one of those things that had been haunting him for Mr. Plim not replying to his letter. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So this was a good example of Olin and his encyclopedic memory. In his own way, Olin was, at least to me, a living time machine. He was born in 1908, and he turned 100 years in good health. And within his lifetime, you know, he probably signed off on 2,500 designs. And yeah, going forward. There we go. I mean, he designed apart from one, Weatherly, all the winning America's Cup boats from 1937 to 1980. That's a record which I doubt that will ever be broken. There you go, going forward. He's the man who, at the age of 21, designed an ocean racer that rocked the world, Dorade. It was interesting when we just talked about, you know, Dorade and Stormy Weather and the two differences, apart from that Stormy was a better boat because of her bigger beam. The beam was primarily driven, the larger beam was driven by the rating rule. You know, the rating rule penalized narrow beam after the transatlantic ocean race, so the CCA changed the rules and you have to change the design because of it. So it's not just the properties of the boat, it's also the rating rules which, you know, strongly influence the shape. Yeah, go on forward. So, but if you look at the man that, if you design a boat at the age of 21 and then race her across to, you know, do the transatlantic and, you know, skipper her when you're 22 years old and win 9 honours and on handicap, that's something. And it basically put him on the map for the rest of his life. So Olin was, you know, if you'd meet him, he was a man of extraordinary intellect, one who would quietly observe, who would listen before he would speak. He was ever curious to have ideas from anyone around him. He would listen, he would come up, he would listen, he would be there to listen to any suggestions made, but he was also very strong in his own decisions. And one of the great strengths he has is that he could imagine the result of combined ideas that were brought into him. His earliest designs were largely intuitive, but he was an early one to recognize the value of science. He started with common sense and balanced lines, and in the right hands these boats were really, really fast. But Olin sought improvement, and in small incremental details and subtle innovations he kept his designs on the podium for most of the 20th century. But when your clientele is buying, when your clientele is buying your product to win a race, the status quo is not an option. The only way to keep your customers from coming back is designing ever faster boats. How big steps are you going to take? Because somehow you need to have something in the pocket for the one who comes after this one. And the biggest struggle or the biggest challenge that Olin had, knowing that, you know, he was a race boat designer primarily, is how do you quantify performance? Because you want to keep your company alive, then somehow you need to be able to improve your boats. And this is where the science came in. And it sounds easy, but how do you weigh performance in this environment where you have an infinite number of variables? How do you single out the effect and the dominance of each individual variance? How do you quantify them in such a way that the outcome gives you a robust prediction of gain or loss in performance? And I think that this was largely Olin's success, that he had an ability to understand all these variables, and not only how these variables worked, but also how they interacted. Not just in absolute performance, but also in relation to the rating rules. It comes back to beams between stormies and dorades. Olin had long recognized the value of science in the tank. And when in 1932 Professor Kenneth Davidson invited him to come along and help develop scale model testing in the Hoboken Institute, he jumped at the opportunity. The core challenge was to find a robust correlation between drive and drag of a scale model in comparison to a full-scale yacht. So the whole idea is, if I pull a little model through the tank and it costs me whatever, I'm just yelling a number here. I take this little model and I pull, and it's cost me half a kilo of pull to pull this thing through the pool. Now I scale it up to a full yacht. How hard do I need to pull on that line to actually get a mathematically correlation, a mathematically matching number between the little model and the big model? So the first thing they tried is to just do it in the swimming pool and started dragging models, but that was at the campus and it upset the students. And at some point the idea apparently was so good that they got a grant to build a tank. And these early experiments led to more experiments. The normal way, and that was the big difference between what Olin and Kenneth Davidson did at the time and the tank testing before that time, is they stopped pulling in a straight line. A sailboat don't sail in a straight line. If you look at a sailboat, it sails skewed. Like the hull moves about 3-4 degrees and goes through the water in that direction, and that actually creates the lift of your foils. So if you're trying to figure out how do I design a faster boat, when it's a sailboat, dragging in a straight line is useless. You need side pressure, you need an angle of heel. And that was where the big development was. And that is what they developed at the Hoboken Institute. So Olin and Kenneth Davidson had been credited to be the pioneers of tank testing from 1932 until basically today, with few exceptions. People just accept the fact that they were the first. But Olin had heard that G.O. Watson in Scotland had done the same. And I was together with him in Scotland. We had the ISAF conference there in 2001, and he kept on nagging and sort of saying, John, I want to know more about what Watson did, because I heard that Watson has done some tank testing with side force and anything we can find out. So we go on forward. So I made an appointment and we went to the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, which by itself, if you're ever in Glasgow, if you like books, go. It's amazing. So we went in, and the reason for going to the Mitchell Library is that at that time, that is where the archive of G.L. Watson was stored. And we were hoping to find something there. We didn't find what we were looking for, but we had the privilege to see the original drawings of the Yacht Britannia, the big cutter that King George sailed with. Incredibly beautiful drawings on sort of very delicate paper, and not just drawn with ink and filled in with colors, and absolutely amazing. But going forward, that's Britannia. So, didn't find what we were looking for, but of course when Olin looked at the drawings of Britannia, he had to tell a story that when in 1930 he sailed across to the transatlantic, and his wife Susie came over on the ferry to celebrate and what have you, and they were staying overnight at Cowes, and in the morning they woke up, and overnight Britannia had slipped right over and came next to Dorade. And Dorade's in relatively terms a small boat, 52 foot, and this thing is enormous, it's 150 feet. So anyway, Susie wakes up and sticks her head outside the boat and looks outside and sees the big thing, and Olin sort of saying, "What do you see?" said, "Oh, you ought to come and have a look. I'll have one of those too." That's when you know you're in trouble. Anyway, so we, as we were in Rome forward, yeah, as we were in Scotland, I, through some contacts, was able to go into the Denny tank, and we heard that Geo Watson had done research in Dumbartonshire to tow test, boats for the America's Cup between 1899 and 1903. And these are some of the old pictures. What they actually built, and this was not dedicated for the America's Cup, but it was changed for the America's Cup in 1900. The tank was about 100 meter long, it was 4.5 meter deep. It had a steam-driven wave-making machine. It had a steam-driven carriage that went over the top. It had a dynamometer, the whole shebang. It was, not much different from what we see in today's tank. Just as Scottish people do, they don't talk about it. We went into the museum, and I called before, and I told them that Mr. Stephens was coming, and all the professors from Glasgow came over. The red carpet was rolled out, and it was wonderful. But the only thing that Olin was interested in is solving the mystery: did Watson test there with side pressure for the America's Cup, yes or no? And the store, everybody sort of said, yeah, that's what we do today, and that's how it's done, and that. I said, no, but we're looking, 1899, 1900. At some point they were so sick of it, and they went home and gave us the key to the attic, and Olin and I went upstairs. Not sure which slide is the next one. Yeah, this is the tank as it is today. You can see the building. It's actually, those tanks were temperature controlled, absolutely way ahead of its time. So they left us alone, and then the three of us, Gilmore Manuel went up as well. Went up into the attic and just go through boxes. And just pulled one drawing after another, and in vain. Nothing happened until the gods decided to smile on us. And one further, yeah, there you go. And I pulled one graph out, which was marked Shamrock at that time, Shamrock 1902, with side pressure, with keel configuration number 3, with transom number 5, with bow number 2. And we thought, okay, this might be it. And we thought it would have been an incidental, just a trial. And we kept on digging, and during that visit, the three of us, we found 2,500 runs through the tank of Valkyrie, which was Dunraven's boat, together with Shamrock 1, 2, and 3 for the America's Cup. And the whole archive was absolutely, utterly completed. I mean, Watson did exactly what Kenneth Davidson did, Professor Kenneth Davidson, and Olin just did it 40 years earlier. And the accuracy with which they did it was mind-boggling. You can switch one forward, one back. So these graphs obviously all handwritten. We found the original, the little notebooks from Watson in which he noted, what was the speed through the tank, what was the angle. He would take a model of Shamrock, and he would test them at different angles of heel. He would test them at different rudder angles. He would test. He had 6 different keel, 6 different bow, and 6 different transom configurations, and actually tried all the iterations in between. And absolutely unbelievable. And this is it's one of those things where for Olin, that was most certainly one, at least in my presence, one of the most emotional moments that I've seen him close to crying, where he sort of said, this is as far as he was concerned, not a lot of people were ever able to catch up with Watson even after he died. And why was that so big for him? Is that basically he walked around on planet Earth as, being the pioneer and the inventor of tank testing with side force. It was Watson. But Watson died 4 years before Olin was born, and took the secret into his grave, and the Scots just sat there and sort of said, it doesn't really matter, who cares? Very strange. We lost the bloody cup anyhow. Who needs a tank? I'll bore you with one more little story. This is Shamrock 3, which William V designed. And one of the things we found is that Mr. Browning, who worked at the tank in 1950, where we weren't the first one to find those graphs. Browning found them, and he started to study and put together. There was something strange that happened in the America's Cup in 1903. You might remember Reliance, this enormous monster that Herreshoff built, biggest, fastest cup boat ever. Lipton ordered a new boat. His Shamrock No. 1 was designed by William V. He lost the cup. Okay, let's go to Watson. 2 years later, he builds one of those things. Watson designs it, loses the cup again. Says, okay, forget about it. Back to Mr. 5. 2 years later, orders this one. But by that time, Lipton had heard that Watson had done tank testing and that it was, giving him hopeful results. So what he said to Mr. 5 is, go and design the boat, but give the model to Mr. Watson and let him test it. Of course, they ran out of time. If you're building one of those things every 2 years and trying to sail a boat race in between, life is busy. So Fife couldn't wait for the final results coming out of the tank, and so this boat was halfway done. And Mr. Watson finds out that the boat's actually slower than the last one. So what do? So the two men sit together. It was the one that Watson designed was Shamrock 2, and this thing was slower than the boat that raced for the America's Cup in 1901. Oh dear. So the next one was, well, let's test how is Shamrock 1, the one that Fife designed. He said, oh, I already did that. That one's slower. I said, okay, good. Call Mr. Lipton, tell him to scrap Shamrock No. 2, because that's the fastest boat, and we'll sail No. 3, and we do No. 3 against No. 1, so it actually looks as if we're faster. That's good psychology. But those were different days in sailing. I mean, if you look at the same time, I mean, this thing was sailing against Reliance, same size. You're looking at a boat 170 foot, so it's about 63 meter long with 1,500 square meter sail to windward. The syndicate that ordered it was, help me, Vanderbilt, Ester, Morgan. Went over to Herreshoff to buy the boat, horse and carriage, and signed off, $1 million, boom. The same day they went to the scrap dealer to sell the boat for scrap after the races. That's, talking about sustainability. Well, they could recycle it. Okay, one forward. If I may, let me go. So anyway, this, sorry for the sidetrack, but that was just Watson and Olin. And Olin actually, honestly, had the deepest respect for Watson. If you had the chance to ask Olin who was the greatest designer of the 20th century, for him it was Watson. No question about it. Okay, so designing these ever faster and better boats was for Sparkman and Stephens the way to survive. As I mentioned before, the performance was always to be judged in relation to a rating rule. And from 1932 on, Olin was a member of every significant rating rule committee, internationally or nationally active. And those forums were truly the forums where the brightest of minds would meet to discuss the most complex of questions. And for Olin, that was at the heart of yacht designing, understanding the rating rules. And being part of the group that formed the rating rules helped him tremendously. And he stayed within the Offshore Racing Council until that same year we went to the Deng Denny tank in 2001, when the Offshore Racing Council, much to his dismay, was dissolved into ISAF. But for Olin, one of his life quests was to find a mathematically correct way to predict the speed of boats. And his first VPP velocity prediction program he developed in the early 60s. And he was basically trying to, obviously tank testing is very expensive, and he was trying to learn and quantify why boats were faster, quicker under different circumstances. So he came up with a mathematical way of predicting this. But the math and the algorithms were so complex that at that time, and they were talking 1960, there were only two computers in the USA that could run the numbers for him. One was at NASA, and the other one was at Wall Street, at the New York Stock Exchange. That's this one. So that was the end of the project. It all sounded good, until Mr. Vanderbilt heard about Olin's plans and thought, okay, we're onto something. So a few more phone calls, and Mr. Vanderbilt arranged that after the New York Stock Exchange closed on Wall Street, that Olin could go in with a group of mathematicians and reprogram the mainframe. And they actually did that for 6 weeks. I mean, if you look at the world's largest financial center, to actually get access there as a yacht designer to figure out how to make a boat go quicker. You gotta love it. But anyway, yeah, there we go. Skipping, you can go on forward. Yeah. Apart from the sailing in the boats, I was very, very lucky to travel with Olin to museums and what have you. And one day, this was Helsinki, I can't remember exactly, was it 2001, 2? When we had the Worlds here. And Olin dropped me a little note and he says, you know, Helsinki, that's not too far from St. Petersburg. And I replied, Hermitage, and the answer was yes. So, okay, what do? You call Johnny Hertel, that's the best one. Johnny helped us to set up the whole trip, and we just, after the championship, we took off to the Hermitage. And for one of the things, apart from art, Olin loved music and architecture, and Johnny stayed with us for 3 or 4 days, and Eugene Van Voris was there as well, and we went to have a look at the Impressionist painters, and went to, you know, Swan Lake Ballet, and Katrina Hoff, and what have you. But one of the interesting things of traveling with someone reasonably old is you know, you check in, and Johnny had organized, you know, this lovely Astoria Waldorf Hotel in St. Petersburg, and Olin checks in. You know, he comes in, you know, reasonably fit. He was 94 years old, and passes his passport, and you know, the girl at the counter looks at his passport, born the 13th of April 1908. Okay. Looks up again, looks down again, up, down. Sir, right. Now, do you need medical assistance? and Olin's reply was classic. He said, no, I don't need medical assistance, but I do need the code for the Wi-Fi so I can check my email. That's if I'm 94 and I can be like that, then you're good. So yeah. Oh yeah, that's one little other one. Of course, we went round the Hermitage, which was, you know, magic. And apart from the art, I enjoy wood. I have a sawmill, and that's my life. So you go around the Hermitage and you see that every floor and every door is made from another very rare, exquisite piece of wood. And so as Olin was pointing out the Renoirs, and come and have a look, and why is this the most beautiful painting? I could say, Olin, have you seen the door? That's Brazilian rosewood, we can't get that anymore. So anyway, we went round together, it was all wonderful, and I come home 6 weeks later, and there's this envelope with a CD from this 94-year-old friend of mine, and it just said, floors and doors for John, and without telling me, he had photographed every floor and every door at the Hermitage, burned them on a CD, and yeah. I'm going forward. Yeah. Okay. We're just doing a little bit of sailing with him. This last time that I went out with him was in 2006. He was 98 years old. That's actually Olin there driving at 98 years old on Bonafide, which is a half-freighter civic boat. And my friend Federico Nardi was with him, and he said that Olin was so tired he fell asleep at the tiller, but the boat kept on going straight. And then the day after, Olin came along with us in Cambria. You can go on forward. That's my that's that. When it comes to boat, that thing is the love of my life. I've been lucky enough to be on the crew for 15 years, and Olin came along with us, and he was 98, and at some point he sort of said, I'm a little bit tired. I'm going to take a nap. So, right in the middle of the race, he lies down in the cockpit and has a little nap and so on. At some point, one eye goes open, the next one opens up, and he calls me over and says, John, I sailed this boat back in 1932. And I remember the main trim was completely different. I think you ought to strap that main down. So anyway, like but very clear. You know, I walked over to the main trimmer and he said, just I think Mrs. Stevens wants a bit more mainsheet tension. And sure enough, the boat took off, and Olin dozed off again. And about 20 minutes later, he wakes up again and peeks over the side of the cockpit. Another eye goes up and looks again and said, John, I really think there's more pressure on the left side. You ought to tack. So the next thing that happened is, it was one of those days where you really didn't care what he said. You just listened and did exactly what he did, and it made the day magic. And you go one forward. There we are. And when Olin says tack, it's helm to lee, and that's it. So there's many more stories to tell about Olin Stephens, and I'm sure many people more have stories about them, and you'll hear more. It's been, at least for me, it was a great honour to travel with him and spend some time with him. And he lived to be 100 years and 5 months old. He passed away in 2008. He's gone, but the man travels with me in my memories, and there's really not a week goes by that he doesn't pass my memory. There you go. Can go more forward. That's it. That's at the final meeting there. So, anyway, that was my bit on Olin Stephens and Ester. Thank you very much.